The 2020s are going to be an interesting time for Pixar. After defining the CG animated film in the 90s and solidifying their brand with a string of classics in the 2000s, they've gotten a lot of criticism over the past decade for seemingly resting on their laurels. If you consider a handful of YouTube videos to be a lot. But if I can just plant my flag in the ground for a sec, I don't think Pixar is dead. The creative minds behind the studio haven't forgotten how to make good movies. I think something else has been going on behind the scenes. A lot of the blame for Pixar's dip in quality is placed on all the sequels that have come out in the 2010s. Whether they were made because directors with previous box office bombs wanted a surefire hit, or because toy cars sell well, doesn't really matter. Most of Pixar's films weren't designed to have continuations. They're built to be fairly self-contained narratives that complete all their characters' development and thoroughly explore their themes, to the point where a continuation isn't left with much to do. Really, Pixar can still make strong original films. I'd argue that Inside Out and Coco can stand toe-to-toe with any of their earlier works. Meanwhile, Brave is... it isn't Cars. The big exception for their originals is The Good Dinosaur, which went through production hell, and which I still have a soft spot for anyway. But where does that leave us going into the 20s? Well, Pixar has 5 releases scheduled between 2020 and 2022. And here's the thing. They're all originals. That's right, Pixar is making more original films in a 3-year period than they did for the entirety of the last decade. We already got a look at the first of these films, Dan Scanlon's Onward. Brian Fee, Mark Andrews, and Pete Docter are all directing films that come after that. And probably the most interesting of the bunch, Domee Shi, who recently made her directing debut with Bao, is working on a film too. Scanlon and Fee actually worked on some of those Pixar sequels and prequels from the past decade, and in both cases, it was their feature film debut. It's important to note that Pixar doesn't make a sequel unless the original creatives want to, so they must have gotten their permission for that to happen. So while I don't have any proof of this, my guess is these new directors were put on safe bet projects to let them cut their teeth, and we're seeing something similar with Josh Cooley on Toy Story 4. Pretty much all of the old guard of Pixar had some experience directing before their first solo project, which might explain why the studio could confidently put out so many original IPs in their early years. But now that they're elevating new talent that has worked in the studio for years doing other stuff, yeah, they probably wanted to make sure they were ready for the big leagues. Whether this theory holds any water or not, well, I can't say, but it's interesting to consider. And it's certainly a more charitable interpretation of Pixar's last few years than them being out of ideas and money hungry. In June of last year, it was officially announced that Pete Docter would be taking over the ousted John Lasseter's role as creative chief officer at Pixar. Considering Docter's work is almost unparalleled within the studio, yeah, I'm on board with this. So they're best guys calling the shots. The new generation of talent is coming into their own, and the era of sequels seems to be over. You want to know how Pixar's going to do in the 2020s? My bet? They're going to be incredible.